Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you from the Messy Time Studios in Florida. Joining me via the interweb is Craig Wright, who is the chief scientist at nChain, coming to us from London. Craig, thanks so much for coming on.
You're welcome.
So today I thought we'd dive into an area of your expertise, right? A lot of folks are increasingly interested in cryptocurrencies, NFTs, all things blockchain. Many people have no clue what distinctions there are in that space. Maybe there's a quick primer that you offer up to folks who ask this and before you roll your eyes at their incompetence.
Okay, so the first thing is it's not actually cryptocurrency. I mean, cryptocurrency is encrypted systems such as eCash that Shaum did for making an early form of digital currency. Bitcoin is neither currency nor encrypted. It is uses algorithms, but there's no encryption. It's plain text. The system is designed to be a digital cash system, but what people do with it and how they promote it are two different things. Same with NFTs. NFTs, what they're currently being used as and what I designed them as when I released patents in 2016 that people seem to think will never be enforced, two different things again. So, I mean, the original design goes back to concepts around ownership of data, not like you have now with Bored Apes and things like this, where they're sitting on a third-party server and you own a URL. But some of the problems I've had in the past include like typical things from Amazon where I have a book and it changes. So there'll be an update. Now, I don't particularly like that. I like my paper books and I like digital books to stay the same.
Right.
So because of certain woke ideas, I've found that books change. They'll be edited on you. And if I buy a version, I like it to be the same. And another problem would be an example of Little Britain. Now, with the whole woke movement, Amazon pulled Little Britain.
That's a tragedy in and of itself. I had no idea this travesty had occurred.
Exactly. Now, I mean, if I've paid for it on Amazon Prime, I should have the right to keep it. I've not even been refunded for it. So what's occurred is in the whole, oh, this is terrible, they make fun of people, woke, anti-everything movement, Little Britain has been sort of deemed offensive and it's now gone.
Wasn't that the whole point?
I mean, it's called comedy, I know.
The computer says no is one of the best lines ever.
I agree. And I mean, they made fun of everyone, but they were equal opportunity in that they made fun of everyone.
Right.
And that was the whole point, making fun of yourself. Now, if I've paid for it, I should have a right to keep watching it and going, oh, we're going to save you from yourself by taking it away from you and taking it out of your library is just wrong. So if I've paid for it, I should be able to have it there. And even if you stop selling new copies because you own the material, the copy I have should remain mine.
Right.
So
most people don't know that, and most people don't notice. My absolutely most marvelous moment of poetic insanity with Amazon on their Kindle was when they had to they caught like a typo or something in the digital version of 1984, and then they changed it. I thought that was perfect. Absolutely perfect.
Very much.
So maybe we can jump on NFTs a bit because that's incredibly topical today. I myself, we do some stuff in the space, but around real assets. Right? I'm an old capital markets geek, and to me, an NFT structure is just a very useful container for information to provide ownership and things like that. The whole thing about pictures of monkeys smoking cigars, I mean, God bless. To me, it's like, all right, want to buy it? Go ahead. But what, in your mind, because the design that you came up with, you know, how would you strictly define a non-fungible token for folks who are kind of wrestling with that?
Well, I'd say there's a token with different use cases, etc. So there isn't a definition. So what we talked about before with a digital asset that now becomes able to be scarce and isolated from all other use and copying, that's one form of asset. And unlike the current ones where people can display images and take them, there are methodologies to actually have that image only displayed if you want it to display. So no one can actually view it even unless you want them to view it. So you can show off a partial image, a thumbnail, but own the actual image. Conversely, things like contracts, the ability to form derivatives, complex sort of swaps, futures, all sorts of trades that are recorded with proper evidence, commodity sort of exchanges, etc., allowing, for instance, a wheat farmer to promise to grow a certain amount of grain at a certain quality and then have to meet that target, whether he has to buy it in or has more to sell, etc., is then up to how good a farmer he is. So all of those things can be applied. On top of that, you could actually build in digital locks. So one example would be if I have a lock on the car door, or even to start the thing, it could be loaded on the phone. And if right now I was to do that, if I made a copy of this and gave it to the valet, then how do I know the valet has deleted it?
Right.
But what I could actually do is have an update. So when the virtual keys get handed back, then I know that they're no longer going to work. Or I could even have them with a dual control system, so that if he doesn't give them back to me, I can still grab them back.
Right. Well, that's an interesting idea. So all sorts of things that, well, when it comes to the futures markets, you just described how futures markets work, but that happens to be run as an intermediary system with a clearinghouse that enforces all that. But the idea here would be making it much more simpler, cleaner, faster, irrefutable on a public chain to look at, versus having the whole apparatus of a futures exchange in a market. So in some senses, that would be a simplifying example.
Yeah, you don't completely get rid of the exchange, but you could probably have multiple exchanges with similar commodity offerings. Example is, I mean, you could sell the same product on multiple sort of locations. You still have all of the real world issues. You still have delivery, you still have clearance, etc. In how do you know that the goods have been delivered correctly? So that doesn't go away. People seem to think that you've got a digital token and everything's good. But I remember back when I was an auditor, we did work with the Perth Mint in Australia. And how do you actually tell that something is gold? Well, a gold bar doesn't mean that it's gold bar.
Right.
And we had to actually destroy gold bars.
Do assays to check the purity levels and all that.
You have to melt them down, make sure no one's mixed in other materials, etc. Because one of the old ones would be people started doing sort of titanium and other bars, and the density would be the same. So this would look like a bar of gold, but it's only worth half a bar of gold.
Right.
And then what people then ended up figuring out they could do is mixing like ground up titanium and lead and things like that into the gold, so that the outside still looks the same, but inside now it's all the same, because you can't just X-ray it. It's gold.
Right.
So you can actually make it so the weight's all the same, etc. And the only way to actually correctly do this is you have to actually assay it properly, which you have to basically melt down the gold and go through it. So you don't lose anything unless it's not gold.
Right.
If it's gold, melting it down, it's still gold, but you have to re-assay it and redo everything.
Well, that's actually an interesting touch point. For some processes in the world, will always remain physical, whether you record the existence of that bar on a shelf in Perth Mint, or the bar on a shelf in a bank, whether you record that on paper or whether you record that on the blockchain. The verifiability of the purity, that process is still physical. Having it necessarily on the blockchain doesn't change anything about it. It's just a way of recording it. I think a lot of people lose track of that. They think has somehow the magical computer is going to solve our physical headaches.
I know, and I've got a piece of paper saying that I bought this bar of gold and it's perfect, but when I go to sell it, I still need to make sure that it's actually valid, and there's a level of trust in that, and people will test things, and if we're talking small amounts, you'll probably get away with it, but for anything large, then
well, there was a famous case here, well, famous in Florida anyway, where we live, but a guy down in Palm Beach had a art gallery for years. I mean, it wasn't even well done. He was buying prints of famous artists like online on eBay for like $100 and passing them off as prints from those famous artists for like 3 million. He did this repeatedly, kind of astonishing actually. And there again, you're going to have the same problem. You've got a electronic tag attached to this. Well, so what? That doesn't mean it's real. So what in your mind is kind of the most powerful application of these sorts of technologies to, is it just smoothing real world processes? Is it just making things more efficient for transfer? Because there's some things, again, as we touched on, like the gold, you don't solve just with computer code. So what are the things that are most powerful to you in innovations around blockchain and NFTs?
Oh, I mean, the main one that I always saw was a smoothing audit. So, I mean, as I said, I used to be an auditor, and I've done a lot of work in logistics and EDI in the past. And the ability to, for instance, properly lock a shipping container and track its movement and know when it's been opened or not using digital equipment actually simplifies a lot of problems. The ability to track serial numbers, ownership also does. Now, other things would be Veblen goods. If you look at like Hermes, if they sell you a bag or something like this, how do you know that it's real? How do you know it's not an extra run? Now, one of the problems is going beyond runs in authorized vendors. So when you have Chinese manufacturers, sometimes they're given a run of 100 items, but they do 200.
Right.
And they stamp them and they do everything. But how do you stop that? So if you actually have a digital token and you can validate this is the real one, and that is a transferable, it's not just a stamp that you go, oh, it's on the blockchain, but you can actually transfer it. And if it's copied, then 2 people will end up with it, or the manufacturer then gives it back to have the token assigned. And then you would be able to actually lock that down so people know that they're getting real goods, real brands.
Right. So they're overpaying for the fluff with no inherent value, and they know for sure that they're overpaying for the actual fluff with no inherent value.
Exactly.
Fair enough.
I mean, had a friend from Japan. His wife is into handbags. Not only an Asian thing, but seems to be even more so over there. But she looked at me sort of like I had 3 heads when I mentioned this, and said, "Well, your friends will be able to tell if it's real or not." Yeah, don't know if I want that.
Exactly. Makes me nervous. Well, I like the logistics example because one of the biggest problems in all logistics chains are humans, right? So the human processes fail mightily because of little things called organized crime, right? So sealing a container and then unsealing it later does not mean it has not been opened repeatedly in between. But if you've got digitally enabled, tamper-proof boxes where the person the mafia wants to intimidate is not present and reachable, that's a great solution. That's a great answer right there, right? Because there's no disputing this thing was opened somewhere along the line, and that makes everything more suspicious.
And then you have to audit, and you have to go over why it was opened.
Yeah, there's still all that work to be done, but it's there's no longer any doubt in your mind whether this container was opened between the time it left Shanghai and passed through Naples. It got open and it arrived in Charleston. You pretty much know it's been open. So, which
is where a lot of people who are the whole code is law mentality get it wrong. They seem to think that we can put a little bit of code on the blockchain and suddenly everything's hunky dory. The reality here is it's a little bit different. You now have an audit trail, and it's an unalterable audit trail, so you know something's happened. Now, from a lodging information, like recording sort of changes to computers, things like this, that's also valuable. So imagine now someone hacks your computer. One of the first things they do is try and delete audit logs.
Right.
And if you know that they've been deleted and you know when they happened, and you can even have a record of where they will be stored that can't be deleted, then that becomes a lot harder.
Interesting. And so what, and this is part of what you all do now kind of professionally. So, what do you think is the kind of the low-hanging fruit in the global economy where there are immediate gains to be had from adoption of this sort of technology versus sort of the ideal case of things that are not quite immediate? Do you have such a hierarchy? Or is that just a...
I don't really have a hierarchy. I mean, there's a lot of people in the gaming industry doing things. I used to be heavily involved, and I'm sort of with other people now who are still heavily involved. But for instance, I helped set up and sort of do the IT side of Lassiter's, and Lassiter's Casino was the first licensed online casino in the world back in 97, 98. And the problem we had was every single transaction needed to be immutably time-stamped and recorded for the government, so that they can monitor every single little transaction and make sure that you paid your tax.
Sure, they're getting their cut.
Yeah, which was quite large, by the way. Yep. Because of that, sort of that actually made things difficult, having separate lines and recording everything in worm drives at the time, which Wright once read many horrible, expensive things. So being able to send information onto the blockchain is much easier, and there's no disputes. So that would have simplified my life if I'd had it 20 years before, like 20 years ago. But like everything, you do one thing and then you see the problem, and then you start working out how to fix other things. But of course, by the time Bitcoin came out, Lassiter's was well and truly dead. The American government managed to kill them off.
I recall that. There's a bit of help. I do remember some guys I knew in New York in the late 90s who were working on online gambling sort of stuff, and they dodged around it for a while by living in the Caymans or something, but eventually got stamped hard.
Yeah. I mean, I was dealing with Playboy gaming for a while as well, and then the Americans caused a whole lot of problems there. Squashed
tragedy them. Attacking an American icon like that. What were they? So that's cool. So I'm most curious. Part of what we love on the show is sort of something that's very unusual, or something that you and your group are doing that others do not. You referenced some earlier patents. Is there stuff that is well, I hate it when people use an adjective to modify unique. It drives me nuts. So is there something unique about the approach that you and your team is taking in the space that others are missing, or they're getting it wrong? Or I'm kind of curious. What are the big picture issues for you?
Well, I mean, they don't understand scaling. They don't understand my system. Everyone gets Bitcoin and all the sort of things that have come from it completely wrong. So, I mean, Bitcoin scales. It always did. I had the argument in 2008 with James Donald, who had the government will come in and do things because there won't be enough nodes. So, I mean, unfortunately, those wacky people have been more vocal than me. But, I mean, we're hoping to be in the millions of transactions a second by the end of the year. And by the end of the decade, I'm planning to be in the tens of billions. Now, the thing I keep saying that people don't understand is plumbing. Bitcoin will be plumbing the same way that TCP is plumbing. No one talks about, oh, have you seen that TCP thing? I mean, it's super cool.
This next version is really sexy. So, and then I mean, but this is a very helpful line of inquiry, because for people who only glancingly hear about this whole ecosystem, when you say that folks are getting it wrong, what particularly do you see that there's correct architecture that you and your team came up with?
There won't be many blockchains. There's no place for many blockchains. There'll be one that scales, because how many internet do you have? I mean, you remember CompuServe?
Vividly, those poor shareholders. Yep.
Yeah, and it's like all the others. Remember Novell?
And the French tried to keep their own ring fenced. I mean, you could argue that China has its own internet, right? And Russia.
Well, not really. I mean,
the same protocol. It depends on how you define it, right?
I mean, I used to sell, sort of do software that would bypass the Chinese firewall for gaming companies. So it's not as sort of controlled as people like to think.
Of course it's not. I mean, there's always a workaround. I remember when Skype first came out, and I was in Dubai for something, and I hadn't bothered to put it on my computer, and I tried to download it, and I got this message saying, this software is like injurious to and in violation of the values and standards of the UAE, meaning the sheikh's not getting a cut, so you're not allowed to have it. And of course, that was fixed shortly. I can't believe I even encountered that and lived with it. When you say that there's no room for more than many blockchains, like if I want to set up a private blockchain to facilitate, work within my customers and my community and my company, why do you think that would be kind of irrelevant or redundant plumbing to
because it contrary to what people say about all the nodes, etc., it's the distribution of the hash header creates the security. So the more people have the block header, the more secure it is. It's not about cryptography, it's wide dissemination of information. It's a MAC, a message authentication digest, in effect. Now, if you're doing that and it's only your group, then there's not really any security to it. The reason I'll say that is it's the same as Bernie Madoff had, because under the US regulations, because of Sarbanes-Oxley, every financial institution, every Fortune 500 have immutable logs. They're all stored on write-only media. You can never change them. It's provable, it's auditable, etc. But no one said you could only have one. Well, actually, you meant to. Yeah, you meant to, but it's like when you had paper records. Paper's also immutable.
Yeah, but if you print the wrong information on it, that's also immutable. Bernie just lied, and he created false statements.
But that's the whole point. But he had multiple sets of books. So he had a set of books for the SEC, and a set of books for the IRS, and a set of books for his investors, and a set of books for inside to manage his own things. And that's the point. So if you have one blockchain, then you can't do that. There's one system. At the beginning of the year, I say, this is the beginning of my transactions, and everything is now publicly auditable, viewable, monitorable.
That's interesting. But there are plenty of things that any rational company does not want public, right? There's nothing wrong with that.
But there's a difference between saying the information's public. If I take a hash of the information, I can prove that nothing has changed without allowing anyone to know it.
Okay, and so for those listeners who have heard hash, but all they think of is the steak and potatoes with their lunch, how would you define hash for someone who doesn't really know computer science well?
It's a index or digest that can't be copied. So if I take a file and a single part of that file changes in any way, you'll get a different number. So it is a unique value that applies to something that is unaltered.
Got it. So it's kind of like an electronic seal on the cabinet. You break the seals, it's going to
effectively, yeah.
Right. Okay.
If the file has never changed, the number will never change.
Got it. So in terms of, to keep that example going, in terms of books and records for a financial firm, the public does not get to see the actual data, but everyone can verify that the hash has not changed. And
exactly. And there's only one version, and then the IRS can come in and go, okay, there's only one version, and we can audit your books if we need to. Investors can see everything and see that nothing's been updated. Any updates follow normal accounting procedures, which means you do an addendum and you say, this has changed. This is where people who haven't been accountants before seem to get things wrong. They think, oh, it's immutable. You can't change anything. Well, you can change
You just have
things,
to record
but
the
you have
change.
to record the change,
Right.
and you know when, and you can't go back and go, oh, well, actually, I backdated this. No, you have the record of when you made the backdating, and all of that gets recorded as well.
Now, in terms of commercial adoption, how prevalent is that sort of model right now for reporting for corporates? Is that a common thing and people slowly getting there? Is it just like, that sounds great, we'll get to it, we're forced to?
We have quite a number of gaming companies are starting to use it, including some of the big British ones here. Some sports betting companies, etc. I've got some lotto companies want to write information so no one can accuse them of sort of nefarious activity.
Right. What do you mean your brother-in-law won the lotto 8 times? Yeah, he's lucky.
Exactly. But we're also dealing with a number of central banks. So then they'll be able to build inside Bitcoin and script effectively like a central bank digital currency. Now, the thing you don't want is a stable coin, because, I mean, some random person going, trust me, I have $1 billion sitting under my mattress, and that's backing this digital asset because I promise, yeah, doesn't really work. Now, people will argue, but you can't trust the central bank. But, I mean, really, central banks can...
You're preaching to the choir. The stablecoin thing made no sense to me whatsoever. We already had that. It's called dollars, right? I mean, you got a PayPal account. There you go.
It's not even that. It is a promise to give you $1.
Right. Which introduces cost and friction between just giving me the dollar. So inevitably it has to have a negative value to it.
Exactly. So I'm going to have this thing that is a wrapped dollar, but I'm not the government, so I don't get to print as many as I want to pay my bills.
Right.
And then I'm going to promise that they're going to make interest. And some of them say, your dollar is going to make interest. So by depositing, I'm going to get higher than the interest rate because obviously I'm investing wisely.
Yeah, of course.
And when the market crashes, well, we see what happened with Luna. Yeah.
That's chaos.
And then everyone goes for a run on the bank, and yeah, those real dollars aren't actually there.
Yep. Well, what I find fun is watching these cycles, because I was out in the Valley in the late 90s when it all the wheels came off wildly, right? And it was utterly predictable. You know, Tiger Management, of course, famously dissolved right before all the short bets would have been right. But you know, pets.com that's spending $8.50 for every dollar revenue and they're blowing $10 million in a Super Bowl ad. Yeah, you'd have to be a genius to figure out that wasn't going to work.
And everyone said to Amazon how stupid Jeff Bezos was, and what a dumb way of doing business. This is not the new business model. Yep. I got that myself. I actually had an IPO back in '99 for a company I had back then, and everyone told me that I was daft and this is not the way that the internet works. I had wacky ideas like actually making profit.
You radical dreamer. What's wrong with you?
I know. How dare you actually try and build things? Yeah, I mean, whereas vulture capitalists would come out and say, well, you can't do that. That's the wrong way of doing business. I mean, this is the internet now.
Yeah, that's fabulous. So do you see the, what parallels do you see between the hype of like 98 to 2000 before all the wheels came off and today's kind of fluff and screaming? What to you would be the kind of immediate parallels that you see?
Oh, same sort of thing. I mean, hype over things that aren't really there. I mean, hey, I've got a domain name, I'm going to be rich. Really? I mean, the same sort of thing happens with ICOs and all this other stuff. And people have very short memories. ICOs are just a rebadged form of what people called web IPOs. So the first ones of those came out in 1996, I think, but they were like pink sheet type offerings,
right,
and decentralized distributed sort of tokens based on some of the cryptocurrencies at the time. And there were cryptocurrencies going back even to the 80s. One of the reasons Shawm actually it didn't take off and eCash didn't, apart from the not meeting legislative requirements and actually reporting money, was that he'd gone to Microsoft, and they were interested in having a digital payment system in Microsoft, but he wanted 1/3 of Microsoft.
Oddly, Bill declined that offer.
Yeah, and just said, "Screw you, go away. We'll invent our own." And yeah, they never really quite made that, but at least they tried.
That's quite a spread between reality. That's where a market comes from. So some people are very wide spreads, some have tighter spreads. That's okay. Well, you know what? I was just kind of curious. What's the sort of biggest, punchiest thing that you would suggest people should be aware of in terms of technical development, moving markets, and moving kind of economic development? Maybe it's the wrong question, but you kind of get the idea. Is there something that is so obvious and top of mind for you and your team and how you look at stuff that you think a large number of folks just completely miss? Is there anything like that?
Oh, practically everything.
Pick your top two.
I mean, the whole needing sort of multiple blockchains reminds me of the protocol gateway stuff that happened in the late 90s. So you had IBM, Novell, etc. doing, there'll be multiple networks and we're going to build protocol gateways between them. Why? That just adds friction. And gradually what happens is people move to one and everyone's on one, and those who don't get left behind.
So technically, just so people get it, when you say that there's going to be only one blockchain, kind of similar to there's only one internet, in practice, that doesn't mean that multiple individuals and multiple companies aren't creating different applications and code on that blockchain. It's just that you think, you know, to keep it simple, right? There's Bitcoin, there's Ethereum, there's Cardano, all these different things. You're saying that for whatever reason, Cardano and Solana, I don't care, will disappear because that protocol is not going to be as useful as, you know, one fundamental chain. Am I characterizing that right?
Yes. Now, if you think for a moment, everything in the web is embedded within IP, which embeds TCP, which embeds HTTP. And they're very dumb protocols. They're just a block of data. And yet you have rich web, you have Zoom meetings, etc. And then you compare that as an alternative to something like the complexity of a Bitcoin script that allows you to program conditions, etc. So if you can do everything you can do on the web on something so dumb as a basic block of data, then you can do much more in sort of the scripting language of Bitcoin. Whether people figure that out anytime soon is another question. But
and what would drive that sort of Highlander-esque? There can be only one. Like what would drive that adoption if someone's got something that's? I understand the point about the different Novell, IBM, but like that network interoperability issue has mainly been solved, right? But now that already exists, what is the commercial or technical driving force that collapses everyone down to just one blockchain protocol? What changes? Why do people?
Oh, economics as always. But I mean, it'll be a bit faster because of the patents the firm I founded own. I mean, we've got close to 2,000 patents at nChain now. So, and they cover fairly much everything that people talk about, and that's only in the ones people understand. The logic gates patent got passed the other day. Logic gates are things like AND, OR, XOR, etc. So what normal people call smart contracts, not that I would call them a smart contract, they're not smart and they're not technically contracts, but that's now patented by nChain. I mean, years ago that we did all this, but it takes years to get a patent through. ERC 721 that people base NFTs on is basically plagiarized from nChain IP from 2016. That amazingly, 3 weeks after it became public, 18 months after the filing date, was invented by Ethereum. So
Right.
they have a choice. People like to go, it's decentralized, you can't do things, but I used to do a lot of government work associated with some of the peer networks, like Kurzella or Grokster or LimeWire, etc. And back when I was working in that sort of field, I did a number of raids on places with a whole lot of nice sort of Australian federal police guys who basically big guys with guns. And
there's always a place for them.
Exactly. And people would go back then that it's peer-to-peer and decentralized, you can't stop it. Well, of course you can.
Right.
Peer-to-peer just means people to people. What you think that crime goes away because it involves people?
They're the ones that come up with the good criminal ideas. We can't lock them out.
Exactly.
Lock them out of the value chain. So when you say kind of commercial reality, that commercial competition to me is everyone uses a tool and offers a tool, and some people buy it, some people don't. Whereas patent exclusion is very different. That's not commercial. That's legal.
Oh, of course, but it's still commercial. But there's also, I mean, it's cost. So even going through multiple gateways, the reason why Novell didn't have their ideas for multiple gateways work is every time you have a hop, it's a cost. So if I want to change between Ethereum to Cardano, then I've got to go and pay 2 or 3% off to an exchange.
Right.
And if I went more than 2 and I want to go there to there to there to track through these things, the cost just goes up.
Right. And that makes a lot of sense. So I guess the biggest thing that you would suggest a lot of kind of users of technical services now are facing is that they've been believing tools that were independently created were actually not. And that's kind of the definition of patent violation. So that's where you guys are focusing on.
Well, I mean, a lot of the people out there go, well, you haven't done anything for all these years, therefore you didn't care and you're not going to do anything. But a lot of people don't understand how patents work. And until you get the grant, even if, I mean, it might say patent pending, and the average person, the average company is smart enough to go, patent pending, maybe I shouldn't do anything against that. But in this industry, people run around going, we're anarchists, we can do what we want. No government going to stop us.
Well, it's really tricky. I mean, I've been involved in the patent wars when it comes to electronic trading since the mid '90s, right? And a lot of the headaches that people face is, and viably so, right? You know, I'm trading firm X, and trading firm Y decided, well, I'm going to build an electronic interface for a bid-ask market, and they actually got a patent granted. Well, the entire industry said that's absurd. That's just turning electronic what we do all day long. It's not innovative. And a lot of those were eventually unwound because of the very fact, like prior art, for those who aren't in patents a lot, doesn't have to mean the exact same medium in which you're claiming the patent. It has to be that there was a practice in the real world upon which that is precedent or that is antecedent that can't be patented. So are you finding people, and you're smiling because this is what you do all day, like, but is that the arguments you're going to be getting in some of this stuff where that proverbial, people often say you can't patent the wheel, but we all know that with a good lawyer, you can patent the wheel. So is that kind of where you are, or what do you think?
You can patent the wheel if you invented the wheel.
That's very true. Lost in the mist of time is the first guy who watched a pebble roll downhill and went, "That's great. I'm just going to put an axle on it." Sorry, I know that's not the same thing.
No, I mean, the other one's more like the Wright brothers versus Curtis.
Yes, Curtis. I mean, Curtis deserves the credit, my opinion. Well, it was the ailerons that they argued about. It wasn't the wing flaps. It was his idea with the ailerons. Anyway, go on.
Well, you realize that they actually they just called them ailerons. I mean, the Wright brothers invented the wing flaps and called them wing flaps, and no one, I mean, and going, oh, well, we should get money because we called them ailerons.
But there was an entire club in upstate New York that was dedicated to aerospace engineering. It wasn't called that then, obviously. It's Flying Club.
Mm-hmm.
And they independently invented a bunch of that. And Curtis, not Curtis Wright, tragically, this is a great example, which most people don't get about history, is personality matters a lot. And the Wright brothers had a wonderful relationship with the curator at the Smithsonian Museum. And Curtis Wright had offended him once. So for years, Curtis Wright is not mentioned in the Smithsonian Museum having anything to do with the development of flight in this country. And they begrudgingly, after that curator died, had to include stuff about Curtis's development. So, but that's an excellent point, right? How do you account for kind of convergent evolution of ideas and technologies in an environment where lots and lots of people are seeing the same sorts of things, right? And then 2 or 3 people independently, much like the calculus, Newton and who's the German? Anyway, you get my point. So, but your thoughts about what
in the Curtis case, they referenced the patent by the Wright brothers. So sitting there going, we improved it. Well, you still used it.
Sure.
So just pay the damn license fees.
Right. That's fair. No, I mean, believe me, I'm a major fan of people getting rewarded for IP development. That's part of what we all do in this world, right?
I mean, I would have been much happier if, with the idea of the Curtis bit, if Curtis just had paid some fees and then charged a hell of a lot of money for their improvements.
Fair enough. Yeah,
and if they'd done that without trying to get out of the fees, it would have been easy.
It'd be fascinating.
Too many people try not to pay.
Be there for those debates, right? Because I'm sure that was on the table as one option, right? And they decided there was another way to go. That's fascinating.
But some of the arguments around patents astound me. I mean, one of the big ones is around cinema. Like people argue that because of the patents held in New York, sort of, which it was still state-based and enforcement back then. What do you call it? Cinema moved out to California, and it would have stayed in New York otherwise. They forget that the original company that went out to New York was owned by General Electric and owned the patents in both states. It was the same person. So they're sitting there going, it all happened because of patents. What you mean? Edison decided to move to from New York to California because he was afraid of his own patent and getting sued by himself.
Not for the better weather. Not at all.
maybe the cheap land and the fact that you could actually know that when you film, it's not going to rain today, or something like this might be worth something to someone.
Sure enough. Interesting. So that's kind of the is that a major focus of what you guys are doing now, and making kind of right sizing how IP is valued and remunerated?
Not really. That's just one area we do to protect it. We've got a lot of development going on. We've got already working with 8 different central banks. That should be increasing to more than 10 soon, I hope.
Is that around kind of digital currency issues, or just more security?
A combination, both digital cash and digital currency, which are actually different things. So the digital cash is more for small amounts. Digital currency will be like a replacement for SWIFT and a better way of doing bank updates, etc.
Right, and could replace theoretically special drawing rights, so that magical nonsense the World Bank and IMF came up with might be a better idea.
And even some of the settlement issues on exchanges, etc. I used to work a long time ago now, but with Australian Stock Exchange, now Securities Exchange, and I did work with chess and like settlements as well, and horrible thing, and like trying to sort out problems. Yeah, it's a nightmare. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I mean, I want to thank you for taking the time to get together today. I mean, it's interesting. There's a billion things to talk about, but in general, it's kind of the takeaway I think for folks would be, There are phenomenally excellent applications to smooth processes, remove frictions, create immutable audit trails, which with people who've never had to actually deal with things like audit and contesting things, they don't quite know. But anyone who's ever been down that road knows how insanely valuable it is to have an immutable audit trail.
Even things like finalized versions of contract, all of the updates. I mean, if you've been through a legal case where people have different versions of paper contract and they go, oh, this is the final one, this is the final. I mean, actually having that where both parties have agreed and it's now provably this is it. Don't know if every lawyer I speak to likes that idea.
No, I mean, speaking as an occasional expert witness, that sounds like a bummer. What do you mean we could settle this in 5 minutes? I don't think so. We need to talk about this.
Oh, they'll still go on about definitions or something. Oh, the word really means.
I'm still not sure what the definition of is. One of my own presidents wasn't sure. So if he can't know, how would I know? Anyway, is there any final words of wisdom for our listeners? Or thanks for coming on.
No, thank you very much. Shame more of you people don't sort of support that thing you've got in the background there.
Which one? The mug, the mug with our logo, or the flag?
No, I was thinking about the thing with the sort of stripes and the stars.
If you'll notice, and what I love about this, it's one of the heaviest pieces of art I own. It's done by a local artist, and if it were any more subtle, it would be horrendously tacky. It's beach glass and shells, genius. But the best thing is, you'll notice, because art trumps reality all day long, there was room for 38 stars, not 50. So my party piece to everyone, especially Americans, is which 12 states would you jettison to form a more perfect union?
Well, just remember, it was only 38 states at one point.
It was 13 at one point. For a while, it was 11, right?
Yeah. 38 was in there, but there was no Texas at that stage. Sorry, Texas.
Nope. So that's always a fun cocktail party piece. We know exactly where someone sits when they decide which states they want to get rid of. I mean, I know. I was born in New York, and I dreadfully miss the New York that I was raised in, but it's gone. So I'll take that one off the table.
Well, one of the sort of ironic things on states there is Jefferson wanted to either buy or annex Cuba.
Yeah, good move. Would have been great.
A different American history, wouldn't it?
Oh,
well, a lot of people in Cuba wanted America to buy it. I mean, they're sitting there going, please buy us, please.
Please buy us. The first and last time Congress ever showed any fiscal restraint, when we bought Alaska for $2 million, Greenland was also available for sale for $4 million. And they were like, nah, it's a little rich, which is hilarious because 5 presidents since then have had discussions about buying Greenland, the most recent, of course, being Donald Trump, and the media, who suffer from derangement syndrome, just before bothering to Google, have we ever thought about buying Greenland, just started screaming that that's the most insane idea they've ever heard, which is odd, sitting in a state that was purchased to be part of the country. But we missed some good ones. Cuba and Greenland would have been fine additions, and sadly we didn't do it.
Well, the irony there is it ended up causing a lot of problems. I mean, the whole Cuban Missile Crisis for one. But one of the reasons was that it actually was in a point that could have blocked American shipping in the early days.
Yep.
So the Cubans would have been able to stop the shipping from different areas, like for the tobacco, for the other things that they sold to keep the Brits sort of healthy and full of smoke, and that wouldn't be there. So
deeply ironically, because Spanish fortifications built because of British aggression, the warp and weft of history. Anyway, Craig, thanks so much. Appreciate you coming on. We'll be watching with interest the developments as they occur. Until next time, as we tell everybody, please turn off the mainstream media. They're lying to you, and tune into Messy Times.
No problem. Talk to you soon.